The church doors flew open, and the guards burst in shouting. In the light of the torches, two people stood by the altar. He was wearing a cassock, his face tense, and she was clinging to him. One of the guards jabbed his spear in their direction. "Who are you?" asked the senior guard, his voice loud. The monk began to tremble. He squeezed the girl's hand so hard that she sighed loudly, then pressed her lips to his palm. "We were praying," said the monk quietly. He looked straight at the guard. "At midnight at the altar?" The older guard smirked. "Show your faces." The girl lowered her eyes. Her voice was hoarse. "I am Martha, daughter of Gregory the executioner." There was silence in response, and someone in the corner smirked. "The executioner, you say?" The senior guard pulled out a note and threw it aside. "Interesting. A holy brother and the executioner's daughter. Rebellion," he said and waved his hand. "Take them to the guardhouse." His words were brief. The guards grabbed the monk and Martha and took them by the arms. She did not resist. He did not resist. They were led along the pavement, where a crowd had already gathered at night. Several people stood, whispering, looking in their direction. Someone shouted, "Honor the holy brother." Others laughed. Her name was Martha, and she was 20 years old. She lived with her father at the city gates. Her father's name was Gregory, and he was an executioner. People avoided their house. Martha knew that the townspeople looked at her differently. She had learned to walk with her eyes downcast, so as not to meet strangers' gazes. When the market women saw her, they moved their goods aside, as if she did not belong there. Children shouted behind her back. She remained silent and walked on. The monk's name was Martin. He was older than the townspeople, and often spent time in the temple and monastery. He was known for his strict discipline and calm demeanor. He did not participate in arguments and rarely spoke at length. People respected and trusted him. It was he who once took Martha away from the threshold of the service and told her to place a candle at the altar. It was a simple gesture, but for her it meant more than 1,000 words. "Here," he said once when she was standing with a small candle in her hands. "Place it by the third pew." She was surprised, but she obeyed. After the service, he approached the gate and said, "If you want, come in the evening. I'll be at the back pew." She didn't know why he said that, but she came. The nights of their meetings were short and quiet. He would sit down, lower his head and say simply, "What is your name?" "Martha," she replied. "Why do you come here?" "Because here I don't have to listen to people," she said. "Here I can just stand." Sometimes he brought bread or an apple. She took it and ate in silence. He looked at her as if he thought it was normal, as if there was no difference between them. She kept his things close to her when he left and waited for the next evening. Her father, Gregory, knew that Martha went to the temple. He didn't like to talk about his craft. Sometimes he came home late and sat by the stove, watching his daughter. Once he asked, "Who is he?" "A monk," Martha replied. He was silent and banged his fist on the table. "Monks are not for people like that," he said. "They have renounced the world." "He is kind," said Martha. "He talks to me." Her father got up and left the room. At night, he went to her door and listened. Then he sat on the porch and was silent for a long time. Rumors spread quickly in the town. People said that the monk was too soft on the executioner's daughter. Some said it was blasphemy, others whispered about the scum of the earth. But the rumors did not reach them. They remained outside the gates. They saw each other and sometimes sat in silence for hours. His face changed when he spoke to her. He did not hide his fatigue and doubt, but he did not hide his pity either. Once he said, "You say that people shunned you. Do you want to get away from that?" "Get away?" She looked at him. "Where to?" "Somewhere where no one will look at your surname. Where you'll just be Martha." She didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands. They were calloused from work and had a small mark on her finger. She looked up. "Will you come with me?" she asked. He closed his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "I tried to be obedient. I tried to listen to the abbot. But I'm human, Martha. I know what I'm doing." She didn't know how to respond. She took his hand and placed it on her shoulder. He squeezed her fingers. Time passed. Their meetings grew longer. They began to talk about the past, about childhood, about what was holding them back. He talked about the temple, about the rules, about how every morning he went to service and felt he had to be calm. She talked about home, about interrogations, about how people had stopped inviting her into their homes. Once she said calmly, "Sometimes I feel like I'm no longer alive for people." He looked at her and said no words of comfort. Instead, he took a simple scarf from his belt and gave it to her. "Take it," he said. "If you leave, hide with it. No one will know you were here." She took the scarf and hid it in her pocket. They looked at each other and did not laugh. Their eyes said what words could not express: fear and need. One night, when the candles in the temple were not lit, he did not let her go home. She sat down next to him, snuggled up and said, "What if they find out? What if my father finds out and people come out into the square? Then we'll leave early," he replied. "We'll leave together." He leaned down so that her lips touched his cheek. She didn't think. She just rested her head on his shoulder and felt herself breathing easily. He put his hand on her hair tightly, as if afraid of losing her at that very moment, and kissed her. It was a simple kiss, without words. Then they parted. She didn't go home that night. He sheltered her in a room at the monastery where old books were kept. She locked the door and thought about what their escape would look like. The next day, the rumors began to spread more widely. Someone had seen them at the back door. Someone said that the monk was allowing himself too much. The abbot summoned Martin to his office. It was hard to breathe in the room. The abbot said briefly, "What are you doing?" "Nothing. I'm keeping the peace in the church," Martin replied. "You know it's dangerous. You know the people won't forgive you." "I know," said Martin. "But I can't stand to see her life so empty." The abbot raised his hand and sighed heavily. He didn't answer, but his gaze said it all. Martha stood in the doorway of the church and listened. She knew that now there was almost no turning back. He left the abbot's office slowly. She waited at the temple gate. When he approached, she looked at him and asked quietly, "What did the abbot say?" "Nothing good," he replied and stopped on the steps. "He said I must leave the brotherhood if I don't stop." She clenched her fists. "Leave? Where?" He looked around as if searching for the right words. Then he said bluntly, "We'll leave here. I'll find a place. I think we can leave tonight." She was silent. Then, almost in a whisper, "Are you sure? Do you realize what that means?" He nodded. "I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions. I don't want your life to go on as before." Her eyes became moist. She looked away and walked to the well, leaning both hands on the stone and breathing slowly. Then she turned and smiled in a way that seemed strange. "Then let's do it." The plan was simple and risky. They decided to leave the city on the night after the next big fair. On that day, there would be many strangers in the city, and their departure could go unnoticed. He arranged with a merchant who sometimes brought fabrics to the monastery to take them away as cargo. They gathered a little money. Martha saved the small change her father brought, and Martin sold some old books from the monastery library. They prepared clothes, trying to choose inconspicuous ones. Martin gave her a man's cloak, so that she could cross the border between people unnoticed. She learned the words she needed to say when passing through the caravanserai. They agreed to meet at the main gate after midnight, when there were fewer guards. At first, everything went smoothly. Martha worked for her father during the day, and sometimes met with her neighbor, who brought her milk. One day, the neighbor, old Anna, lingered and saw Martha clutching Martin's handkerchief in her hand and hiding it under her shirt. She asked tensely, "Do you have someone?" "No, Marta replied." Anna looked deeper and thought for a moment, then said, "Be careful. People don't forgive." Martha felt something tighten inside her, but she said nothing. That same day, she noticed that her figure had changed. Her clothes were tighter, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw not only her fatigue, but also a small bulge on her stomach. At first, she didn't know what it was. That night, she went to Martin and said, unable to hide it any longer, "I think I'm pregnant." He sat down next to her, took her hands and looked at her for a long time. There was more fear than joy in his eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I can feel it. And my clothes don't fit me anymore." He was silent and ran his finger over her palm, as if searching for an answer. "If it's true, then we have to leave quickly. It will change everything." She lowered her head. What if we can't? What if they catch us? Then I won't stay. I'll leave with you, even if we have to flee without the protection of the church. She saw him like this for the first time, uncertain but determined. That night, neither of them slept well. He stood by the window and looked out at the street. She listened as the sounds of the city faded away. She knew that things were getting serious now. They sped up their preparations. Martin became less visible in the monastery. He did not participate in public services, citing illness. The abbot noticed this and grumbled, but did not interfere seriously. Martha began to appear at home less often so that her father would not notice where her things were going. She explained her disappearances by saying she was going to the market. Her father noticed everything, but did not ask directly. Sometimes he came in the evening and locked the door for the night. Martha said quietly, "I'm at my mother's," even though her mother was not at home. The days dragged on. There were many strangers at the fair. People haggled loudly, workers carried boxes, horses pulled carts. The day before their departure, Martha and Martin met at the old warehouse to count the money. When they opened the bag, they found that one coin was missing. Martin frowned. Someone took it. I read in a scientific paper that sometimes people take. Martha interrupted him. Who could have taken it? He laughed bitterly. I don't know. Maybe someone in the monastery. Maybe someone is watching us. They didn't have time to discuss it. Suddenly, a young messenger from the abbot approached them. A man who delivered orders and was always close to the monks. He stopped, looked at them and asked simply, "Are you leaving today?" They froze. Martin replied quickly, "No, we're staying." The boy looked at them more closely, as if he sensed a lie. He smiled and took a step aside. "I heard that one monk received money for books yesterday. They say he's leaving with someone." The words were simple, but Martha felt herself turn pale. They thanked the messenger and let him go. But at that moment, Martha realized that their plan could be exposed. Someone in the monastery knew about the money. Someone could tell the town. At night, the crowd at the gate was smaller. The merchants had left, silence descended on the city, and the air became thick with anticipation. They hid among the carts and sacks, and Martha put on a man's cloak. Martin took the sack with their belongings, a simple strap over his shoulder, and in his hand a note with the name of the merchant with whom they had made an agreement. They walked slowly towards the gate, looking back. Every step seemed louder. When they reached the gate, one of the guards smiled and said, "You're late, brother. The night is not for walking." Martin replied calmly, "We're in a hurry, we have business to attend to." The guard looked at their bags and nodded. He opened the gate and let them through. The street was empty. They had almost left when they heard a cry in the distance. First one person shouted, then another joined in. Footsteps grew louder. Someone was running towards them. "What's that?" whispered Martha, grabbing Martin's cloak sleeve. "I don't know," he replied and pulled her towards the cart. They hid in the shadows, huddling close together. The shouts grew louder, and they caught glimpses of words like executioner, monk, and traitor. Their names rang out from the mouths of the people. At that moment, Martha felt her heart sink. Martin also turned pale. He whispered, "Hide deeper. Don't look out." They sat and listened to the approaching crowd. The cries became clearer. "Get them! Get the scoundrels!" At that moment, it became clear to them. Someone had betrayed them. They didn't have time to move further before people rushed out of the doors and from all sides. At first there were a few voices. Then the crowd surrounded them. Someone pointed a finger, someone shouted. The guards rushed forward and pulled them out of the shadows. Martha clutched his cloak desperately. "Let us go," Martin shouted. "We're leaving. We haven't done anything against the law." "Lies," shouted one of the men. "You're a monk, and she's the executioner's daughter. It's a disgrace." One of the guards pulled Martin by the sleeve and dragged him forward. Martha instinctively stood in front of him, as if she could shield him with her body. Her lips trembled. Someone struck with a warm whip, and the sound echoed through the street. They grabbed her by the arms, tied her up, and dragged her to the guardhouse. Martin tried to free her. He shouted insistently, "I am responsible for her. I will leave with her. Let her go." "See for yourself," said one of the guards. First to the guardhouse, then to the judge. They were placed in the open air, in the center of the square. People were waiting. Some brought torches, some banged knives on tables, some called for a priest. Soon the abbot approached. His face was calm, but his eyes were stricter than before. "What have you done?" he asked Martin without raising his voice. "I love her," Martin said bluntly. "I want to leave with her." "Love," repeated the abbot. "You are a monk. You took a vow. You know what that means." Martin lowered his head. He pulled himself together and said quietly, "I have broken my vow. I am ready to accept punishment. But I ask for mercy for her. She is not to blame for the way people judge her." The crowd hissed. Someone shouted, "Expel him." Others demanded blood. Soon a judge approached them, a city official who was supposed to decide such matters. He looked at the crowd and at the bound monk, his eyes trying not to betray his fear. "Punishment," he said. "This is not a simple matter. Order and law. We cannot just hang people." "But what about the insult to the church?" shouted one of the parishioners. "What will the archbishop say when he finds out?" The judge sighed and called for a clerk. He asked verbally who had witnessed the incident and prepared to hear the testimony. Martin said dryly, "I take the blame. I broke my vow. Let the church deal with me. But don't touch her." One of the old men, who disliked the executioner and his daughter, came closer and poked Martha in the chest. "You've forgotten who your father is. You've forgotten your homeland. You're bringing shame on us." His voice was quiet and harsh. The crowd began to talk about the girl being pregnant. The rumor spread like wildfire. Someone called for a doctor. The doctor came, examined Martha and whispered to the judge, "She is indeed pregnant. 3 months along or a little more." These words caused a new surge of emotion. People began to shout even louder. For many, this was proof of immorality. A monk and the executioner's daughter. The pregnancy was proof of their relationship, and the crowd's fury intensified. Her father appeared in the crowd. Gregory approached the square, his face looking like that of a man who had come there against his will. He was holding his work clothes in his hands. The people parted. He saw his bound daughter and the monk. His lips tightened. He could not hold back a cry. "Martha!" He lunged forward, but the guards pushed him back. "What have you done to my child?" He looked at the judge. "Why are you treating her like a criminal?" Martha looked up and saw her father. Hope flashed in her eyes for a second. He was not shouting at her, but at those surrounding them. "Father," Martha managed to say, "I'm leaving. We wanted to leave." He promised. Gregory looked at Martin, then at his daughter. His hand trembled. He stepped forward and grabbed the monk by the sleeve. "What have you done to my daughter?" he asked, his voice breaking. He couldn't show the anger that was most important to people. He was an executioner, but now he was a father. "You are disgracing her." Martin did not back down. He took his father's hand and burned him with his gaze. "I love Martha," he said. "I am ready to leave with her. I beg your forgiveness." Gregory looked at the monk and then at his daughter. He began to cry. At that moment, someone in the crowd shouted, "The law depends on the voice of the crowd." And the crowd began to buzz. People began to demand public punishment. Exile, beatings, deprivation of vows, etc. The judge hesitated. The abbot stood up and said sternly, "The church will punish Brother Martin for breaking his vows. But for the sake of order and as an example to society, public repentance is required. I will hand him over to the church court, and the girl will be handed over to the senior magistrate. He will decide what to do." The crowd reacted with discontent. They wanted blood, not church words. Someone shouted, publicly, in the square. The judge decided to appease the crowd to avoid a riot. He ordered that the monk be publicly defrocked and then handed over to the civil authorities, and the girl should be publicly reprimanded and exiled or fined. But the crowd did not want this. They demanded a harsher punishment. Then one of the merchants rushed forward, grabbed a rope and swung it around. "Let's hang them," he shouted. The cries became frenzied. The guards tried to hold the people back, but the crowd surged forward. In the commotion, someone struck the monk, someone else struck Martha. Martin stood between them, shielding her with his body. He shouted and fought back, but the forces were unequal. The people dragged them to a pillar in the center of the square. Gregory tried to break free. He shouted, begging for mercy. Someone grabbed him and pinned him to the ground. He struggled, but he couldn't break through the wave of hatred. "Have mercy on her," he shouted through clenched teeth. "She's my daughter." They did not believe him. They said that the executioner was not worthy of pity, that his daughter was an eternal disgrace. The crowd decided to take matters into their own hands. They cut off Martin's cassock and put a belt on him. They held Martha down, pressing her arms. They tied them up and pushed them onto a makeshift platform. Martin looked at Martha. His eyes were full of fear and love. They whispered briefly to each other. "I'm with you. I'm with you," she whispered, her lips trembling. They held each other's hands tightly, as if they could hold on to the world that way. The crowd began to pull on the ropes. Claps, shouts. Gregory fought desperately, begging for mercy from those around him, begging for mercy from the abbot, from the judge. But his words did not change the decision of the crowd. The last thing Martha and Martin heard were the voices of the crowd and the shouts of those standing closer. They tried to speak, but the rope muffled their words. Their eyes met one last time. Martin squeezed her hand, smiled, and whispered softly, "Forgive me." "No," she replied, and her eyes closed. The crowd gradually quietened down. Gregory fell to his knees and wept. The abbot turned away. The judge recorded the decision, as required by the circumstances, and then returned to his home, while the people spread out across the streets, discussing what had happened. At night, only sadness and emptiness remained in Gregory's house. People said that it was for the best, that justice had prevailed. But some who had seen the monk holding the girl's hand until the very last moment could not find peace. They walked home with heavy hearts and the quiet knowledge that they had made the world a little harsher. The crowd dispersed by morning. Many returned home with tired eyes, some whispering, some silent. Only traces of ropes remained on the square, and people gathered around the pillar to clean up. The street was quiet, and everyone was lost in their own thoughts. Gregory sat on the edge of his bench, his elbows resting on his knees, unable to stand up. His hands were shaking. The blacksmith, who always came to him on business, approached and put his hand on his shoulder. "Do you want me to help?" asked the blacksmith. "Help?" Gregory looked at him. Help with what? He himself did not understand the answer. The blacksmith sat down silently beside him and gave him a glass of water. He did not talk about the trial or the punishment. People began to disperse, but the rumors did not subside. Many said, "It was necessary," while others whispered, "It shouldn't have been done." The abbot shut himself in his room. He was not seen at the altar for several days. He received letters from the diocese. His face remained calm, but he could not sleep. In the evening, an old acquaintance from a neighboring town came to see him, a priest who knew the rules and church canons. "You will have to give an account," he said. "The archbishop will ask." "I fulfilled the demands of the people," replied the abbot quietly. "I thought it was for the best." "Did you think about your brother's soul? About the court?" asked the guest. "People demand, but what is right is not always just." The abbot lowered his gaze. He was silent for a long time. Then he bowed his head and said, "I will pray." The judge who had passed the sentence in the square received a letter from the merchants. They asked for an explanation. He walked around the house and heard footsteps. His words became more cautious. Deputies came to him and asked how he had decided to give in to the crowd. "I did what the situation demanded," he explained. "I was afraid of a riot. If a riot starts, everyone will suffer." "But did you do what was right?" asked one of them. "People will remember that you didn't look deeper." The judge did not answer. He felt vulnerable. Gregory could not live as before. He came to work, but his hands were not as steady as before. His wife left to stay with a relative and returned only a month later. She saw that her husband had changed. The neighbors' children no longer came to play in the yard. People were afraid to approach him. Several weeks passed. The abbot received a letter from the bishop. It contained questions about discipline and how the public review had taken place. He summoned all the monks to a council. Many spoke quietly, some made excuses. "We couldn't allow the church to be disgraced," said one monk. "Disgrace from people is one thing," replied another, "but seeking the truth is quite another." After his execution, Martin left behind his possessions, a few books and a cloak. The cloak was found dusty in a corner of the monastery storeroom. It was given to the church, but many were afraid to wear it. One night, a woman who was a good friend of Martha's came and placed a small candle next to the cloak. She whispered, "They were human beings. I will remember them." Letters addressed to the judge and the abbot appeared in the city. Some wrote that he had done the right thing, others demanded justice. People began leaving bread and milk at Grigory's shop, but he couldn't eat. He looked at the corner where Martha used to sit, and every time he passed by, the memory weighed so heavily on him that he stopped. 6 months passed. One of the old people who knew Martha well gathered some soil from her grave and brought it to Grigory's house. He put the soil in a small bag. When Grigory saw it, he began to cry as he had never cried before. He took the bag and pressed it to his chest. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked the old man hoarsely. "Why didn't you protect her?" "We were afraid," replied the old man. "We thought the voice of the crowd was stronger. We were wrong." These words touched his heart. He began to walk around the city asking for forgiveness. He went to the homes of those he had known all his life and said, "I ask for forgiveness." They asked him to be quiet, but he could not be quiet. Meanwhile, an investigation began at the monastery. The archbishop sent a commission. They questioned the monks, spoke with the abbot, and studied the papers. One day, the commission summoned Gregory and asked him what he remembered about the daughter. Gregory spoke dryly, without raising his eyes. "I couldn't help," he said. "I thought I had no strength left. I was the executioner, but I didn't want to be the judge of her life. Now I know I was wrong." The commission recorded his words. They decided to dismiss the abbot from his post, punish several guards for exceeding their authority, and issue a verbal reprimand to the judge. This was little consolation for the town. Many felt that the punishments were too lenient. But after that, people began to look at events differently. Some began to openly admit that they had succumbed to fear. A small group of young people began to visit Martha's grave and lay flowers. They came in the evenings, silently, and left without a word. It was absurd and insignificant, but for Grigory it was meaningful. He began to work in the mornings and do little, but gradually he learned to hold a hammer again. He would come to his daughter's grave and sit nearby. Sometimes someone would come up and say, "Remember that she was your daughter." He nodded, but the words barely registered. Years passed. The merchants returned to their business. The judge died of old age. The abbot moved away. Martin remained in memory as a name that many pronounced differently. Some with condemnation, others with pity. The city did not change instantly, but a new idea emerged among the people. One cannot rely on the fury of the crowd. One must look at people with attention. One day, a young woman approached Gregory. She was holding a child by the hand. She said quietly, "I heard about your daughter. I wanted to thank you. I came to the grave and lit candles. I wanted you to know that I remember." Gregory looked at the child and the woman. He raised his hand, touched the child's cheek, and suddenly something tightened inside him. He paused and then said, "Thank you." He couldn't bring back what he had lost. He couldn't change the past. But in those moments, it seemed to him that the memory of Marta lived on somewhere in the people who came to her grave and placed small items there. It wasn't redemption, but it was the truth. People began to remember and ask themselves questions. The last years of Grigory's life were quiet. He grew older, his hands trembled, but sometimes he would take silent visitors aside and talk about his daughter. He spoke briefly, without embellishment. "She just wanted to be a person. I didn't give her that." When he died, several people came to the funeral. Among them were those who had placed flowers on Martin and Martha's grave. They walked in silence, and someone said quietly, "Let them be remembered as just people." Many years passed. The town kept the memory of that day alive. Sometimes the old people would say to the children, "Don't repeat what we did." The children listened and quickly forgot because life went on. But candles burned at Martha's grave. People who remembered came and placed them there. Thus ended the story that began with a cry at the altar. For some, it was a lesson, for others an excuse. For still others, pain that could not be expressed. Life went on. People made choices again and again, and the memory of them remained with those who did not forget.